Welcome to Story Planet, where time slows and peaceful tales drift like a quiet breeze. Tonight, we take a gentle journey to Evermere, a village where time is not measured, only lived. Let yourself settle. Feel the stillness, the hush of the evening, the warmth of lantern light. Let go of the day, breathe easy, and step into a world where life moves at the pace of the heart. Now let the story begin. Tonight's story is an old one, told and retold beneath the glow of lantern light, whispered by the elders as children curl into their blankets, their eyes wide with wonder. It is a story of a village like no other, a place where time is not counted, where the wind and river set the rhythm of life. As the fire crackles and the night settles around them, the village storyteller begins, his voice weaving through the stillness like a lullaby. Let me tell you a story, one that has been whispered through the ages, carried on the breath of the wind and nestled in the roots of the oldest trees. It is the story of a village unlike any other, a place where time is not measured, where the sun and stars are the only keepers of rhythm, and where life flows as gently as a river after the rain. This village is called Evermere, and if you listen closely, you might hear its heartbeat in the quiet moments between your own. Evermere was hidden between rolling green hills, where golden fields swayed lazily in the breeze, and a crystal-clear stream wound its way through the valley. There were no towering stone clocks, no bells tolling the passage of the hours, no ticking hands measuring the weight of each passing second. In Evermere, time belonged to no one, and yet it belonged to everyone. They say that long ago there was a clock in the center of the village, a great, brass-faced thing that stood tall in the square, watching over the people with its steady, unwavering hands. It dictated their mornings and their nights, the beginnings and endings of their days. And yet, one evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the sky turned the color of embers, the clock simply stopped. No one knew why. Perhaps it had grown tired of chasing time, or perhaps it had simply decided to rest. The villagers stood before it, waiting for someone to wind it again. But no one did. And so life continued, without the ticking, without the counting, without the rush. Instead of waking to the clang of bells, the people of Evermere rose with the song of the birds. Some stirred as the first golden rays of dawn stretched their fingers across the sky, while others lingered in their dreams, letting the warmth of the morning seep into their bones. No one was ever late, because there was no such thing as too early or too late. The baker Elsa began her day not with an alarm, but with the scent of dew-kissed earth and the soft hush of flour against the wooden counter. She kneaded dough until it felt right, shaped loaves when her hands told her it was time, and baked them when the air carried the perfect warmth. Down by the stream, Orrin the miller did not check the sky for the time. He watched the water. When it flowed with an easy, unhurried grace, he knew it was the moment to set his mill in motion. Miriam the herbalist tended her garden not by a schedule, but by instinct. She ran her fingers over the leaves of her plants, feeling their readiness, listening to the whispers of the wind that told her when to gather. She never plucked too soon, never harvested too late. The lavender, the thyme, the rosemary, all grew in their own time, just as the people of Evermere did. And what of the market? Ah, the market. Now that was a thing of beauty. It did not open with the ringing of a bell or the strike of an hour. It unfolded. When the farmers brought their fruits, the market began. Tomas the fisherman arrived with his morning's catch, still glistening with river water. Clara the weaver laid out her fabrics, dyed in colors as rich as the evening sky. Daniel the beekeeper placed jars of golden honey on his stall, each one glowing like captured sunlight. The villagers gathered when they were ready, spoke not of prices and bargains, but of seasons and soil, of rain and laughter, of how the earth had been kind that year. There was no rush. There was only now. The children, oh, the children. They roamed free, their laughter twining through the air like the scent of fresh bread. There were no school bells, no fixed lessons. They learned from the world around them, counting the apples in their baskets, tracing patterns in the woven fabrics, watching the bees move from flower to flower. Elder Hamish, the village craftsman, sat on his porch, carving wood into wondrous shapes. The children gathered around him, their eyes wide as he told them stories of trees that remembered every whisper of the wind, of rivers that carried secrets to the sea. At midday, when the sun stretched its arms high above the valley, the village did something truly remarkable. It stopped. Not in exhaustion, not in obligation, but in reverence for rest. Beneath the towering oak tree in the center of Evermere, people gathered. They sat on cool grass, shaded by the great sweeping branches, sharing stories, humming quiet songs, or simply closing their eyes and breathing in the stillness. There was no guilt in pausing, no shame in waiting, no regret in moving at the pace of the heart. As the afternoon melted into evening, the scent of warm bread filled the air once more. Fishermen mended their nets, their voices a low murmur, sharing stories of the river's moods. The last of the market stalls were packed away, not because a clock demanded it, but because the sky had begun its shift into softer hues, painting the village in gold and lavender. Evening in Evermere was not an ending. It was a slowing. Lanterns flickered on porches, their glow casting gentle halos in the night. Old Samuel, the poet, recited verses by the firelight, his voice a melody that wove itself into the hush of the wind. Children curled up against their parents, their eyes growing heavy, their dreams already forming in the space between words. No one told them it was bedtime, they simply felt it. And as the stars blinked into existence, as the night wrapped Evermere in its quiet embrace, the village breathed a sigh, not of exhaustion, not of relief, but of contentment. Because here, there were no lost hours, no fleeting minutes, no days slipping through grasping fingers. There was only the steady, peaceful rhythm of a life well lived. And so Evermere drifted into sleep, slowly, softly, endlessly at peace. Tonight, the old storyteller clears his throat, his voice steady as the fire crackles before him. The children lean in, their faces dappled with the soft glow of lantern light, their eyes bright with anticipation. The story of Evermere continues, not with a bell tolling the new day, but with the soft hum of morning unfolding as it always has, without haste, without measure, without time. In Evermere, dawn does not arrive with urgency. There is no alarm to break the gentle silence of sleep, no bustling streets echoing with hurried footsteps. Instead, morning slips in like a whisper, weaving its way through the thatched rooftops, brushing its fingers against sleepy faces. Birds begin their song, not as a call to action, but as a greeting to the world. Their melodies drift through open windows, urging eyes to flutter open when they are ready, when the body has had its fill of rest. The people of Evermere wake at their own pace, stretching beneath soft linen covers, listening to the rustling of leaves outside their doors. Some rise early, drawn by the scent of dew-kissed air, the promise of new beginnings. Others linger, savoring the warmth of dreams before stepping into the quiet hum of the village stirring to life. Elsa the baker is among the first to rise, her hands already dusted with flour before the sky has fully brightened. She does not measure the time it takes to knead the dough, nor does she set a timer for the loaves to bake. She simply knows when they are ready, when the scent fills her little shop, curling into the air like a promise. Oren the miller listens to the river as he grinds the grain, waiting for its murmur to tell him when the wheel should turn. Miriam the herbalist steps into her garden barefoot, feeling the earth beneath her feet, knowing by the touch of the leaves which herbs are ready to be gathered. The village awakens in waves. Children tumble from their beds, rubbing sleep from their eyes, pulling on woolen sweaters, and running outside without pause, their laughter ringing through the crisp morning air. Some chase each other through the golden fields, their feet brushing against the wildflowers, while others wade into the shallow parts of the stream, sending ripples across the water's glassy surface. There are no schedules, no structured lessons, only the endless curiosity of young minds eager to learn from the world around them. As the village comes to life, the market unfolds. There is no official start, no call to gather, only the quiet, natural rhythm of people arriving with their wares, setting up stalls when their hands feel ready. Tomas the fisherman lays out his morning's catch, the scales of silver trout glinting in the light. Clara the weaver arranges her freshly dyed fabrics, their colors mirroring the morning sky. Daniel the beekeeper arrives with jars of honey so golden they look like sunlight captured in glass. The villagers move without hurry, without obligation. They stop to chat, to admire, to trade stories along with their goods. No one asks, "How long have you been here?" because the answer does not matter. No one worries if they have spent too much time lingering over warm bread or too little time tending their stalls. Life moves at the pace it is meant to move, like a river winding through the valley, slow and steady, without rush. At midday, the village does what it has always done. It pauses, not because they are told to, not because a bell marks the hour, but because their bodies know it is time to rest. Beneath the sprawling oak tree, villagers gather in the shade, reclining against the sturdy roots, sharing quiet moments. Some close their eyes, letting the cool breeze kiss their faces, while others exchange stories, their voices no louder than the rustling leaves above them. Old Samuel, the poet, sits with a small group of children, his voice weaving soft words into the air. He tells them of the first days of Evermere, of the time when the village chose to leave the ticking hands of the clock behind. He speaks of a world that once chased time, of people who hurried through their days only to find they had forgotten how to live within them. The children listen, wide-eyed, their fingers tracing patterns in the dirt as they imagine a life where moments are rushed, where playtime is counted, where bedtime comes before the body is ready for sleep. They shake their heads, unable to understand why anyone would wish to trade peace for numbers. The afternoon drifts lazily into evening. The scent of warm bread still lingers in the air, mixing with the salty breeze from the river. Fishermen mend their nets, humming to themselves, while mothers rock their little ones on quiet porches. The market has faded, not because it is time to end, but because the day has reached its natural close. As the last streaks of gold melt into twilight, lanterns flicker to life, their glow casting soft halos along the village paths. People gather outside their homes, sipping tea, speaking in low, comforting voices. There is no rush to finish conversations, no glance at a clock to see how late it has grown. The night is simply here, and that is enough. The storyteller looks out at the gathered faces, his voice lowering to a hush. The children lean closer, sensing the story's end, their eyelids growing heavier, their bodies sinking deeper into the warm embrace of the evening. And so, the village of Evermere continues, he says, his words weaving into the hush of the night. Tomorrow will come as it always does, not when the clock demands it, but when the sun lifts its golden head over the hills. And when it does, the village will wake again, not to measured hours, but to the quiet rhythm of life itself. A sigh drifts through the gathered crowd, not of exhaustion, but of peace. The children nestle closer to their parents, their breathing slow, their dreams already stirring. Above them, the stars flicker into the night sky, not marking time, but simply being. And Evermere rests once more, just as it always has, gently, unmeasured, endlessly at peace. The storyteller settles into his chair once more, his fingers tracing the wooden armrests worn smooth by time. The fire flickers, sending shadows dancing across the gathered faces, and the hush of the evening welcomes the continuation of the tale. The village of Evermere awaits, stretching into another day, another moment, where time does not rule but rather flows like a gentle breeze through the valley. Morning lingers softly over Evermere, golden light unfurling across the rooftops, dappling the cobbled pathways with warmth. A veil of mist clings to the riverbanks, retreating as the sun lifts higher, melting away into the crisp air. The villagers emerge from their homes, not in haste, but with the ease of those who know the day belongs to them, not the ticking hands of a clock. Children dash across the fields, their laughter rolling over the hills like the first winds of spring. Their bare feet press into the cool grass, damp with morning dew, their arms stretched wide as if to embrace the sky itself. There is no rush to dress, no urgency to be anywhere but here, in the golden embrace of the morning. Some take turns skipping stones across the river's glassy surface, watching ripples stretch outward like endless possibilities. Others gather near the bakery, drawn by the promise of fresh bread, waiting patiently for Elsa to finish her work, their noses twitching at the scent of rising dough. Evermere is alive, not with hurry, but with harmony. Rowan, the potter, sits outside his workshop, shaping clay with steady hands. His wheel spins with a rhythm not dictated by minutes or hours, but by the feel of the earth beneath his fingers. Lucia, the weaver, hums a quiet tune as she threads her loom, pulling strands of color together like woven stories. The hum of life moves through the village, effortless and unbound. Down by the river, a small gathering forms around Elder Hamish, who sits on a mossy stone, his old hands smoothing over a block of wood. His apprentices, young and eager, watch as he carves with patience, his movements deliberate, his gaze thoughtful. Wood tells its own story, he murmurs, his voice as steady as the flow of the river beside him. It does not rush to become something it is not, and neither should we. The children nod, entranced, their fingers tracing the patterns of his carvings as if absorbing the wisdom through touch alone. The market unfolds as it always does, when the hands that tend to the earth decide it is time. Miriam the herbalist lays out bundles of sage and rosemary, their fragrances curling into the air like whispered spells of comfort. Thomas the fisherman arrives with his latest catch, his nets still damp, glistening with river water. Clara the weaver unfurls new fabrics, dyed in hues borrowed from the wildflowers that grow beyond the village's edge. Each stall is a reflection of its keeper's care, a piece of Evermere's soul laid bare for all to share. As the sun climbs higher, warmth settles over the valley, inviting moments of rest. Under the old willow tree, villagers find their refuge, some reclining in the shade, others stretched upon the grass, eyes half-lidded, listening to the distant melody of birds. Conversations drift lazily, unhurried, like the clouds above. A traveler has arrived, his boots dusted with the remnants of roads far beyond Evermere's borders. He listens, wide-eyed to the voices around him, marveling at the slowness of it all, at the peace that wraps around this place like a soft embrace. Old Samuel, the poet, notices the traveler's quiet wonder and offers him a seat by the riverbank. "Stay as long as you like," he says, his voice carrying the weight of 100 peaceful days. There is no time here, only moments waiting to be lived. The traveler nods, something in him loosening, uncoiling from the grip of the world he has left behind. Evening stretches long and golden, the air scented with the promise of night. The fire pits are lit, their embers pulsing like the heartbeat of the village. Families gather, sharing meals prepared without haste, savoring every bite as if it were the first. The night settles in like an old friend, bringing with it the hush of contentment. The storyteller glances at the children, now curled against their parents, their eyes heavy, their dreams already forming in the quiet spaces between his words. He leans forward, voice dipping into a whisper. And so Evermere moves forward, not in steps measured by a clock, but in the steady, endless rhythm of life itself. A sigh ripples through the crowd, a shared breath of peace. The flames flicker low, the stars blink into existence, and the village rests once more, gently, unmeasured, endlessly at peace. The storyteller settles deeper into his chair, the glow of the fire casting long shadows against the wooden beams of the gathering hall. The children, some nestled against their parents, others curled into blankets on the floor, listen with wide eyes as the night deepens. Tonight, the story flows like the river that winds through Evermere, steady and unhurried, weaving itself into the hearts of those who listen. The river was Evermere's quiet guide, its current neither rushed nor idle, its waters neither too deep nor too shallow. It had no need for time, only movement, only presence. It was said that if you stood at its banks with your feet in the cool water and closed your eyes, you could hear the village breathing in sync with its gentle rhythm. No one knew this better than Tomas the fisherman, whose days were spent along its shores, his nets cast with patience, his hands as steady as the rippling tide. Tomas never hurried to fish, for the river had its own way of deciding when it would give and when it would keep its treasures. On some mornings, the water shimmered with the glint of silver scales, and the villagers knew there would be a feast. Other times, the river held on to its bounty, and the people simply waited, knowing that what was meant to come would come in its own time. Children often played along the riverbanks, their laughter skipping across the water like the stones they sent tumbling across its surface. They waded in the shallows, their toes curling against the smooth river stones, catching glimpses of darting fish and watching the reeds sway with the movement of the current. The river was their friend, a quiet companion that never asked them to move faster than their feet wished to go. One afternoon, as the sun hung high in the sky, a boy named Emery sat at the river's edge, his hands resting on his knees, watching the water swirl past. He had come with the other children but had wandered away, drawn by the quiet movement of the current. He had never thought much about time before, never wondered why his father, a man from beyond Evermere's hills, still carried a watch he never wound. But today, as he watched the river flow, he began to understand. "Do you see how it moves?" a voice asked beside him. Emery turned to find Elder Hamish, the village's woodcarver, lowering himself onto the bank beside him. The old man carried a smooth piece of driftwood, his carving knife glinting in the light as he ran it gently across the grain. "It doesn't stop," Emery said, his voice quiet. "No," Hamish agreed, nodding. "But it does not race either. It moves because it must, because it is in its nature. Just as you must wake when you are rested and sleep when you are tired. Just as the trees must shed their leaves in autumn and bloom again in spring." Emery thought about this for a long while, listening to the rustling reeds, to the soft hush of the river's song. "What happens if we try to hold on to it?" he asked, finally, dipping his hand into the water and cupping a small amount in his palm. Hamish smiled, watching as the water slipped through the boy's fingers, returning to the river where it belonged. "We cannot hold time, Emery. We can only live within it, the way the river flows within its banks." Emery nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle in his heart. He looked down at the river once more, and for the first time he did not try to count the ripples or measure how far a leaf drifted before sinking beneath the surface. He simply watched, letting the moment exist as it was, unbroken, unmeasured. That evening, as the sun melted into the hills, Tomas returned to the village with his boat swaying gently behind him, empty but for a single fish. He did not sigh, did not shake his head. Instead, he smiled, pulling his nets ashore with the ease of someone who knew tomorrow would come, and with it, another chance. The villagers greeted him warmly, as they always did, for in Evermere no one was measured by what they had gathered in a day, but by how they had lived within it. As the fire crackled in the gathering hall, the storyteller looked at the faces before him, lingering on Emery, who sat quietly, his mind still drifting with the river's current. The boy's eyes held something new, something deeper, a quiet understanding that had not been there before. "And so," the storyteller said, his voice carrying the weight of the night, "Evermere flowed forward, just as the river did, not bound by time but carried by the rhythm of life itself." The flames flickered low, the wind hummed against the wooden beams, and one by one, the children's eyes grew heavy. The night, like the river, moved on, and Evermere, unhurried, drifted into dreams. The storyteller let the hush of the evening settle before he spoke again. The fire crackled softly, casting golden light upon the faces of those gathered, their eyes waiting for the story to continue. Outside, the wind wove its way through the village, slipping between rooftops, bending the tops of the trees, and carrying with it the whispers of the past and present alike. Evermere had always listened to the wind. It was the village's unseen guide, its voice a constant companion that could soothe as easily as it could stir. It rustled through the leaves in gentle conversation, whistled through the eaves of cottages, and danced between the river reeds. Some said the wind carried stories, memories from distant lands, secrets shared by the mountains, and even the echoes of laughter from those who had walked Evermere's paths long before. No one knew this better than Lena, the village seamstress, who had spent her life sewing clothes that moved with the breeze. She never stitched to a measured pattern, never traced the outlines of rigid designs. Instead, she let the wind decide the shapes, the fabric flowing like water beneath her hands. Her shawls billowed as if they had caught the breath of the valley itself. Her dresses swayed like wheat in the fields. "The wind tells me what it needs," she would say, her fingers running over threads spun from the softest wool. "And I listen." One autumn evening, as the first golden leaves began to fall, a stranger arrived in Evermere. He was a traveler, his cloak lined with dust from roads that stretched beyond the horizon. He did not carry a map, nor did he ask for directions, for something in the air had led him here, something in the hush of the wind that whispered, "Come." The villagers welcomed him as they always did, offering a place at their table, warm bread, and a place to rest. But the traveler did not sit right away. He stood in the center of the square, eyes closed, arms outstretched, feeling the wind circle around him. "This place is different," he said at last, his voice touched with wonder. "I have walked through cities where the wind has no room to breathe. I have passed through towns where it is pushed away by walls and chimneys where it cannot speak." He opened his eyes, gazing at the village with something like reverence. "But here, the wind is alive." The villagers nodded, understanding without words. In Evermere, the wind was not a force to be tamed, but a friend to be listened to. It carried the scent of lavender from the hills, the cool mist of the river, the hush of wheat swaying in the fields. And if one listened closely enough, it carried wisdom too. That night, the traveler sat with old Samuel, the poet, beside the fire. "Tell me," the traveler asked, "what does the wind say?" Samuel smiled, his gaze lifting toward the dark sky where the stars shimmered. "It says what we need to hear," he answered. "To the restless, it sings of stillness. To the weary, it carries the scent of home. And to those who do not know where they are going, it whispers, 'Follow me.'" The traveler thought about this as the fire burned low, as the embers cast flickering shadows upon the ground. He had spent his life chasing destinations, measuring his days in footsteps, his travels in distances crossed. But here in Evermere, there were no maps, no schedules, no need to race against something unseen. Here the wind did not push. It guided. By morning, the traveler remained. He did not gather his cloak, did not set his feet toward another road. Instead, he stood at the edge of the river, watching the reeds bend, feeling the wind brush against his skin. And for the first time, he did not wonder what lay beyond the hills. He only wondered what it would feel like to stay. And so, Evermere gained another soul, another story woven into the fabric of its days. The wind did not speak of where he had been or where he might have gone. It only carried the truth of now, the peace of being exactly where one was meant to be. The storyteller let his words drift into the quiet that followed, his voice fading like the last note of a song. The children curled deeper into their blankets, their dreams already pulling them away, carried perhaps by the same wind that had led the traveler home. And outside, Evermere breathed with the night, the wind humming its endless melody, a song that had no beginning and no end, only the soft, steady rhythm of life itself. Bookmark, go back. The fire flickered low, casting gentle shadows on the wooden beams above. The storyteller let the hush settle once more, the night holding its breath, waiting. Then his voice rose again, weaving its way through the listening hearts. Tonight's tale, he promised, would be about the lanterns of Evermere, the soft golden beacons that flickered like fallen stars across the village each night. The people of Evermere did not fear the dark, for the night was not an ending but a new rhythm, as soft and necessary as the daylight that came before it. When the sun melted into the horizon and the sky deepened into hues of indigo and violet, the villagers began their quiet ritual. One by one, they lit their lanterns, placing them along the stone pathways, on porches, in windowsills, where their glow reached out like whispers to the world beyond. Each lantern carried a meaning, a memory, a wish. Some were placed outside doors as a sign of warmth, a message to any traveler that they would find shelter in Evermere. Others were set near the river's edge, flickering reflections dancing across the water, guiding the fish home to their resting places. And then there were the lanterns left along the hills, their golden light drifting in the wind like fireflies, a quiet offering to the stars above. Among those who cherished this nightly tradition most was Elias, the village glassmaker. His hands, aged yet steady, had crafted nearly every lantern in Evermere, shaping their delicate glass with the care of someone who understood light itself. He would often sit outside his workshop at dusk, watching as his creations came to life, their glow filling the village like tiny suns. A lantern, he often said, is not just light. It is a promise that the dark will always be gentle. One evening, a child named Marion sat beside Elias, watching as he shaped a new lantern from molten glass. She was quiet for a long time, listening to the soft crackle of the kiln, the rhythmic turning of Elias's hands as he blew life into the glass. Finally, she asked, "Why do we light the lanterns every night?" Elias smiled, setting down his work and gazing at the many glowing orbs dotting the village. "Because light is meant to be shared," he said. "It is not enough to keep it only for ourselves. We light these lanterns so that no one feels lost, so that if someone stumbles in the dark, they know there is a place where they can rest." Marion nodded, tracing her fingers over the surface of a newly finished lantern, still cool and waiting to be placed among the others. That night, for the first time, she took a lantern of her own and placed it at the edge of her window, watching as its light joined the countless others in Evermere, their glow stretching like golden threads across the village. As the evening deepened, families sat on their porches, sipping warm tea, watching their lanterns sway in the breeze. Some spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories beneath the moon's silver gaze, while others simply sat in silence, content in the warmth of the light that surrounded them. Old Samuel, the poet, wrote verses by the glow of a single lantern, his ink gliding across parchment as he captured the stillness of the night. Further up the hill, where the village met the sky, travelers paused in their journeys, their weary eyes drawn to the gentle flickering of Evermere's lights. Many had arrived at the village this way, following the golden glow, drawn by its quiet promise of peace. Some stayed for a night, others for a lifetime, but all left knowing that in Evermere there was always a light to guide them home. The storyteller's voice softened as he neared the end of his tale, letting his words settle like embers in the minds of those who listened. Outside, the lanterns still flickered, their glow weaving through the darkness, keeping the village wrapped in its quiet embrace. "And so," he murmured, his voice a lullaby to the weary, "Evermere shines, not in the brightness of the day, but in the gentle glow of its people, in the warmth of their light, in the promise that the dark is never truly empty." One by one, the children's eyes grew heavy, their dreams drifting into golden horizons where lanterns floated like stars, where the night was not something to fear but something to welcome. And as the village settled into sleep, Evermere, unhurried, glowed on. The storyteller let the hush settle once more, the embers in the fire pit glowing softly as the night deepened around them. He glanced at the expectant faces before him, eyes bright with curiosity, little hands curled under chins, waiting. Tonight, the story would be about the great feast of Evermere, a gathering unlike any other, where time was not measured, only savored. Evermere had no calendars, no marked months, no numbered years. Instead, the village followed the whispers of the seasons, watching the way the wind shifted, the way the river carried the scent of spring before it had even arrived, the way the first frost painted lace across the rooftops. The people knew it was time for the great feast, not because a date had arrived, but because the land itself said, "Now it is ready." It began with the golden harvest, when the fields, ripe and full, seemed to bow under the weight of their abundance. The farmers worked with hands steady and unhurried, gathering wheat, apples, and honeycombs, their baskets brimming with the gifts of the earth. In the orchards, laughter echoed between the trees as families plucked fruit from low-hanging branches, their fingertips sticky with sweetness. Elsa, the baker, kneaded dough infused with wild herbs, shaping loaves with care, knowing they would be shared among many. Thomas, the fisherman, prepared his nets, knowing that the river, generous in its own way, would provide just as much as was needed. For 3 days, the village worked, not in haste, but in joy. They gathered, prepared, and arranged, knowing that each hand played a part, that the meal ahead was not just food, but a tribute to the cycle of life itself. The feast was not about indulgence, but about gratitude, a moment to honor the earth's quiet generosity, and to celebrate the people who had tended it with love. On the evening of the feast, Evermere glowed brighter than ever before. Lanterns swayed from tree branches, their golden flicker dancing against the leaves. Long wooden tables were arranged in the village square, adorned with fresh-cut wildflowers and wooden bowls filled with the season's best. The scent of roasting vegetables, sweet bread, and warm spiced tea filled the air, curling into the cool night like an embrace. As the villagers took their places, there was no rush to begin. They sat together, speaking in soft voices, watching the way the sky darkened to an endless indigo, stars flickering awake one by one. There were no toasts, no formal speeches, only the quiet knowledge that they had all arrived at this moment together, that the harvest had been kind, that their hands had worked in harmony with the land, and that tonight they would share in its gifts. Old Samuel, the poet, raised his cup, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. "The river has flowed as it always has," he murmured. "The wind has sung its song, and we have listened. Let us eat with full hearts." And so they did. There was laughter and warmth, stories traded between bites of honeyed bread, hands passing plates without need for words. The children, wide-eyed with wonder, tasted fruit they had picked themselves, feeling the weight of the moment even in their young hearts. Music wove its way through the feast, the sound of Rowan's fiddle mingling with the night air. Some danced, feet tapping against the cobblestones, spinning in circles that knew no end. Others sat quietly, watching, letting the moment settle into them like the warmth of the meal itself. As the evening deepened, the fire burned lower, and one by one the villagers leaned into one another, full, not just of food, but of something deeper, something older than hunger. They were full of belonging. The storyteller let his words linger. Let the images settle in the minds of those listening. And so, he said softly, Evermere feasted, not for a day, nor for a night, but for as long as the land allowed. And when the meal was done, when the laughter had softened into whispers and the stars had watched over them all, they knew time had never been lost, it had only ever been lived. A long sigh of contentment swept through the gathering. The children, their bellies warm, nestled closer to their parents, their dreams already filled with the scent of honey, the sound of the fiddle, the glow of lanterns above. Evermere, wrapped in the hush of a night well spent, settled once more into the rhythm of the world, unhurried, unmeasured, endlessly at peace. The storyteller watched the flames dance in the fire pit, their golden glow casting flickering patterns across the faces of those gathered. The feast of seasons had passed, and with it, the village had stepped into the quiet embrace of winter. The tale would continue, for Evermere did not stop when the harvest was over. It only moved into a softer rhythm, one where time slowed even more, as if nature itself wished to linger in its own peace. The first snowfall in Evermere was never hurried. It did not come with sudden winds or wild tempests. Instead, it arrived like a hush, a whisper drifting from the sky, settling gently upon the rooftops, blanketing the world in a soft, endless quiet. It came when the trees had already shed their golden coats, when the river ran slower, thicker, beneath a thin layer of ice. The people of Evermere did not prepare for it in a flurry of urgency, nor did they dread its arrival. They welcomed it, the way one welcomes the deep exhale at the end of a long day. Children woke to a world turned white, their laughter ringing through the crisp air as they stepped outside, their footprints the first to mark the untouched snow. They did not rush to play, but rather marveled at the way everything had changed overnight. The rooftops crowned with frost, the icicles hanging like crystal bells from the eaves, the trees dressed in a shimmering coat of winter's breath. Elsa, the baker, worked by the warm glow of her oven, kneading dough with hands steady and sure. The scent of spiced bread and sugared nuts curled through the streets, mingling with the crisp air, an invitation for all to gather. Miriam, the herbalist, prepared steaming mugs of tea, steeped with dried berries and wild mint, the warmth of the cups seeping into the hands of those who held them. The snowfall did not change the way Evermere lived. It only softened it. The market continued, its stalls now dressed in garlands of pine and holly, the villagers wrapped in thick woolen cloaks as they traded winter fruits, fresh cream, and woven mittens. Rowan, the potter, shaped clay by his hearth, molding delicate cups that would soon hold warmth against winter's chill. Thomas, the fisherman, moved carefully along the river banks, watching as the ice formed its quiet patterns, knowing that beneath it, life still moved, waiting for spring. By afternoon, the snowfall had thickened, the sky draped in a soft veil of white. The village square, once home to summer dances and autumn feasts, now became a place of whispered conversations and quiet walks. Some sat on wooden benches, their breath curling like smoke into the air, watching the world slow. Others gathered in small circles, their voices hushed, as if afraid to disturb the peace the snow had brought. One such gathering took place beneath the great oak tree, its bare branches stretching toward the sky, its roots buried deep beneath the frozen earth. Old Samuel, the poet, stood beneath it, his long coat dusted with snow, his hands tucked deep into his sleeves. The children, drawn to his presence, settled in the snowbanks before him, their eyes expectant. "Tell us a story," one of them whispered. Samuel smiled, his breath forming a cloud before him. "The snow tells its own story," he said, his voice as gentle as the falling flakes. "It speaks of stillness, of patience, of how not all beauty must be rushed, not all moments must be filled with noise. Sometimes the quiet is enough." The children listened, their wide eyes reflecting the world around them. And in that moment, As the village rested beneath winter's hush, they understood. The snow did not ask to be hurried, nor did it demand to be admired. It simply fell, blanketing Evermere in a peace that could not be measured. As evening approached, the villagers lit their lanterns once more, their golden glow reflecting off the snow-covered paths. The fire pits crackled, their warmth drawing people together, hands wrapped around steaming mugs, stories shared in low, content voices. The night did not demand movement, nor did it push them toward urgency. It only offered itself, the way winter always did, quiet, slow, waiting to be lived. The storyteller leaned back in his chair, the flickering firelight dancing across his face. And so, he murmured, Evermere settled into the heart of winter, not as something to endure, but as something to embrace. And as the snow continued to fall, the village, unhurried, drifted into dreams. The children sighed, curling deeper into their blankets, their lashes dusted with sleep. Outside, the snow continued its silent descent, and Evermere, wrapped in its hush, remained just as it always had, peaceful, timeless, endlessly at rest. The storyteller let the warmth of the fire settle into the quiet before he spoke again. Outside, the snow lay thick upon the rooftops, the village wrapped in a hush deeper than words. But even in the stillness, Evermere was alive, moving with a rhythm known only to those who listened. Tonight's story was not about the wind or the river, nor about the lanterns or the harvest. Tonight, it was about the paths walked, the footprints left behind, and the quiet knowing that even in a place without time, journeys still unfold. The snowfall had softened the world, but paths still formed where feet had traveled. Some prints led to the bakery, where Elsa's oven burned bright, warming hands and hearts alike. Others traced their way to the herbalist's shop, where Miriam ground dried lavender into pouches for winter's rest. And there were footprints that led beyond the village, brought toward the forest's edge, paths taken by those who wandered, not to leave, but to listen. Elias, the glassmaker, often followed one such path. He was a man of quiet steps, his fingers worn from years of shaping delicate things. He had always believed that glass, though fragile, held strength, just as stillness held depth. He walked beyond the last cottage, where the trees stood tall, where the wind hummed through the pines. There he gathered the fallen frost-kissed branches, twigs encased in ice, their surfaces gleaming in the pale morning sun. Winter does not still the world, he often said. It only shows us what is waiting beneath. One morning, a young girl named Leora followed his footprints. She had watched him many times, her curiosity as quiet as the snow itself. She did not ask why he walked alone, nor why he gathered the icy twigs with such care. Instead, she stepped into his footprints, matching her steps to his, listening to the way the snow whispered beneath her boots. When Elias noticed her presence, he only smiled. "Are you searching for something?" he asked, his voice gentle as the snowfall around them. Leora hesitated before answering. "I wanted to know where the footprints led." Elias nodded, bending to pick up a branch, its icy surface catching the morning light. "And what have you found?" Leora looked around. The quiet of the woods, the hush of the world blanketed in white, the way the trees stood still but not lifeless. "I think," she said slowly, "I think they lead to somewhere you don't have to hurry." Elias chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Then you have found the right path." Together, they carried the branches back to the village, where Elias set to work. The twigs, once bare and brittle, became something new in his hands. He shaped them into frames, weaving them into lanterns lined with frosted glass, their surfaces etched with delicate patterns that captured the quiet beauty of the season. That night, as Evermere gathered by the fire, the new lanterns were placed along the pathways. Their glow was softer than the usual golden lights, their reflections shimmering against the snow. They did not burn with urgency, nor did they push against the darkness. They simply existed, like footprints left behind, marks of a journey, proof of a path taken, whispers of a moment lived. The storyteller's voice softened, settling into the hush of the night. And so, he murmured, Evermere walked forward, not with haste, not with worry, but with the knowledge that every step, even the quiet ones, leaves something behind. And under the watchful sky, beneath the hush of falling snow, the village, unhurried, walked toward another day. The fire flickered low, the children's eyelids drooped, and outside, the lanterns cast their soft glow upon the footprints in the snow. Paths that did not rush to disappear, but faded gently, as all things do, in their own time. The storyteller leaned back in his chair, the fire crackling softly at his feet. Outside, Evermere rested beneath a sky filled with stars, their glow mirrored in the river's quiet waters. Tonight, he would tell the final part of this tale, not of an ending but of a beginning, for in Evermere, nothing truly ended, only flowed into the next moment, the next season, the next breath. The river, the wind, the trees, the people. Everything in Evermere had its reflection. Just as the sky cast itself upon the water, so too did the village reflect the rhythm of the world around it. If the river ran slow, so did the people. If the wind carried the scent of spring, the village stretched awake with it. If the snowfall hushed the earth, Evermere wrapped itself in stillness, as though listening to something only it could hear. And so, it was no surprise that one evening, a boy named Callum stood at the river's edge, watching his own reflection ripple across the water. He had always loved the way the river never held on to anything, how it let each moment slip through, carrying it away without regret. "You watch it often," said Miriam, the herbalist, as she approached, her basket heavy with dried herbs, their scent curling into the cool night air. Callum nodded. "I wonder where it goes." Miriam knelt beside him, dipping her fingers into the water. "The river does not ask where it is going," she said. "It simply moves, knowing that wherever it ends up, it was always meant to be there." Callum frowned, his young mind trying to grasp the thought. "But what if it never finds where it's supposed to be?" Miriam smiled. "It already has. Right here, right now, reflecting the stars above." Callum looked down again, watching the silver light shimmer on the surface. He had never thought about it that way before. He had always imagined that the river was chasing something far beyond Evermere. But now he realized, maybe it was not chasing at all. Maybe it was simply being. That night, as the village gathered around the fire for one last story, the storyteller let the flames dance in his eyes before speaking. "Evermere does not keep time," he said. "It does not race against it, nor try to hold it still. It only moves within it, the way the river flows, the way the wind shifts, the way the stars shine without counting the hours they have left." The children listened, their eyes reflecting the flickering firelight, their hearts already lulled by the weight of the story settling over them like a soft blanket. "And so," the storyteller continued, his voice barely more than a whisper, "Evermere lived, not by the clock, nor by the calendar, but by the gentle rhythm of life itself. And as long as the river flowed, as long as the trees whispered, as long as a single lantern glowed against the night, time would never be lost here. It would only be lived." A hush settled over the crowd, not from sleep, but from peace. Outside, the river carried the reflection of the sky upon its back, the stars twinkling in its depths, as though the heavens themselves had come down to rest upon its surface. And so, as the fire burned low and the village of Evermere drifted into dreams, the storyteller's voice faded into the night, carried away like the river's endless song, unhurried, unmeasured, and never truly ending. Thank you for traveling with us to a village beyond time, where the world moves as gently as a river's flow, and life is measured, not in hours, but in moments lived. If you felt the warmth of the firelight, the hush of the snowfall, the glow of the lanterns in the night, then consider giving a thumbs up and sharing this story with someone who might need its peace. And if you'd like to hear more, to drift into another world, where life slows down and the heart finds rest, be sure to stay with us. here on Story Planet, wishing you a quiet night and the sweetest of dreams. Until next time.